Hi, Professor. My name is Linda Nguyen, and this is my presentation on Chapter 3, my critical analysis video. So starting off with the first question you gave us of how did women participate in the revolution? So early on in the revolution, they first started to go against the merchants. So they boycotted against the economic injustices that the merchants had given them, such as raising all the prices so that women weren't really able to sustain their family at that point. And so they led food riots and just seized what they needed. And then next thing they did was writing about the situation. So they had written a lot in diaries or they sent letters to each other between female to female of people who were literate. And they also, by doing so, they had informed a lot of people. And that includes their family and anyone who happened to just hear about those newses. And then they also insisted on buying American, which meant that they would boycott the British goods. They wouldn't use anything that had the British import, British mass producing or British label on it. And so by doing so, they had to make their own goods. So instead of using the British goods, they made their own tea, biscuits, wallets, clothing, cartridges, bullets, and that is a list of evidence I found towards the information. And those are a few pictures of how women had gone American and how they participated in the revolution. Moving on to how they specifically supported the colonial cause. So during the war, everything was going on. They had ended up raising money. Yes. Hi, Professor. My name is Linda Nguyen, and this is my critical analysis video on Chapter 3. So as for the first question you gave us of how women participated in the revolution, so the first thing they did early on in the revolution was to boycott against the economic injustices of merchants raising prices. So during that time, merchants had increased the price of food and a lot of things for their daily life. And so the women had led food riots in order to seize all the goods they needed in order to support their family. Later on, after that, they had been writing a lot about the situation. So literate women were writing in their diaries, sending letters, or just talking a lot about it with their families and other women. And so that really educated a lot of people and informed them of what was happening. The next thing they did was insist on buying American, which is, as it sounds, they had boycotted against the use of anything British. So whether it was imported by the British, had a British label was created by them, and so on, they had refused to use it. And so they had to make their own goods. And they had replaced all the British goods by making their own tea, their own biscuits, wallet, clothing, bullets, and a lot of cloth. And that is a list of evidence I found to those quotes or to those bullet points. And those are some pictures of how women had gone American and how they participated in the revolution. Moving on to what they specifically did to support colonial cause or during the war, they had raised a lot of money for the troops. So they had opened a national women's organization to raise money, and they had amassed a lot of money and sent it to George Washington. However, he decided that his soldiers wouldn't really use the money effectively, and so he just tasked it to the women to do what they needed with it, and those women ended up buying a lot of linen and made clothes for every single soldier. Next was they followed the militia as support. So not only did they perform all of the basic tasks, they were doing cooking, laundry, service, solace. They were also performing nurse duty, so healing the wounded. And not only that, they also acted as spies, couriers, and soldiers. So a lot of the or a few of the women in the army had disguised as men in order to act as soldiers. And those are also some of the quotes I found. And pictures on the right are more of them just participating in the war. The last one is explaining Republican motherhood and how did women embrace this new civic duty? So, Republican motherhood was a role that the government gave to the woman. It was a patriotic duty and a new political role that was given after the government and everyone had saw how capable women were during the revolution. And that just meant that women were now raising their kids by educating them, and they were raising them to be the future Republican citizens, which was really critical to state welfare. And she had to specifically raise her sons to be really moral and virtuous, to be able to kind of lead a country or just be able to support their families. And a lot of women use this as a stepping stool and brought in a lot of their feminist ideologies. So after seeing how capable they were in the revolution and how they were given more recognition and more roles for what they're able to do, they had ended up writing a lot about feminist qualities and how women actually had a lot more power than they thought, and how they um weren't just lusty creatures or hysteric women. And that also connects to how it had really reformed their original lives, views, and how people had perceived them, because now women were sane and they're a lot more important to the economy or the era then. And those pictures on the right are how woman had ended up being the educator of all children and how she educated her son. And also, after a certain amount of time, there were female academies open. So women were actually offered the chance to teach people, and they were also being very educated, because back then, women really didn't have an education. All that they were there for was to be lusty, provide sexual care for men, and also just be the sustenance for the family. So they, of course, had a much higher role and just overall raised the importance of women in that economy. And this concludes my presentation. Thank you for listening.